Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for tonight's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. The series was launched in early 2018, and while we miss having in-person events at the store, we love having this opportunity to connect with you all virtually. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. My colleague Ashley will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you will purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Tonight, I have the great honor of introducing Aminatta Forna and Maaza Mengiste to discuss Forna's new essay collection, The Window Seat, Notes from a Life in Motion. Aminatta Forna is the author of the novels Ancestor Stones, The Memory of Love, The Hired Man, and Happiness, as well as the memoir, The Devil That Danced on the Water. Forna's books have been translated into 22 languages, and her essays have appeared in Brick, Freeman's, Granta, The Guardian, Kenyon Review, Literary Hub, the New York Review of Books Daily, The Observer, and Vogue. She is currently director and Lannan Foundation Chair of Poetics at Lannan Center for Poetics and Social Practice at Georgetown University. And tonight's moderator, Maaza Mengiste, is the author of The Shadow King, shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize and a recipient of the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature. It was also named an LA Times Book Prize finalist and a Best Book of 2019 by the New York Times, NPR, Time, Elle, and other publications. Beneath the Lion's Gaze, her debut, was selected by The Guardian as one of the 10 best contemporary African books. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. And now, Aminatta and Maaza.
Thank you so much, Pierce. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk with my good friend Aminatta about her latest book, which is absolutely brilliant. Window Seat, for those of you that have not gotten it, it just came out, is a spectacular collection, and will be I'll be discussing some of the ways that I find it absolutely riveting. But I'd like to just begin at the very beginning, in essence, with this book. Aminatta, a few months ago, you and I had an online conversation that was published in LitHub about the jacket cover. And I'd like to, let's just start with that. You mentioned that the photo was taken just outside of Timbuktu, where you were filming a documentary, The Lost Libraries of Timbuktu. Could you tell us more about what this documentary was and what your experiences were like in Timbuktu, in Mali, making this documentary?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pierce, and lovely to be talking to you again, Maaza. And thank everybody for being with us this evening. What was I doing in Mali? Well, actually, I by happenstance, had been to Timbuktu several times. And the third and final time when that picture was taken, I was called by the BBC and asked if I would present a documentary on the lost libraries of Timbuktu. And when they gave me the call, you can tell that they thought that this was extraordinary. I was going to be super excited. And I said, oh yeah, I've been there twice. And the producer was floored, but I was able to tell him, I said, there's not a lot there anymore. There's not a lot to see anymore. I mean, what's there is marvelous, but it's now quite a pretty small place, Timbuktu. But so my former life before I became a writer was as a journalist and a TV reporter. So those are the reasons I was asked. I'm a writer. It makes sense. I'm an African. I'm a West African. And in fact, as time would go by, many years after that, a decade after I made that documentary, but the first time I went to Timbuktu, I was actually reporting the insurgence of the Tuareg. And then the second time I went, I was so taken with Mali and its art and its culture and its history that I actually persuaded the BBC to commission me when I was a very young reporter producer to make a documentary on the art of Mali. Wow. And then I went back to do the Lost Library. So I got to know this country really well, and I absolutely adore it. One of the things I write about in the book is my husband giving me a DNA test, and for Christmas, because it was the thing, and it was going cheap. I think he'd been offered one online or something, and he thought I was researching something to do with DNA. It's actually about white nationalists, so it's nothing to do. But that's another story. But he said, "Oh, look, why don't you do it?" And I said, I know where we come from. And actually the Fornas, the oral history of the Fornas, had always said, we came originally from Mali. And so anyway, I thought, actually, do you know what? I think I'll test this oral history. Mm-hmm. I'll test this oral history and see if it works. And sure enough, I did my DNA test, 48% Malian. And so, I called my sister, told my sister, we're Malian. And she said, "Isn't that your favorite country?" And I said, "Yeah, it is actually my favorite country." But, as lovely as an idea that is, I think it's probably quite a few people's favorite country. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous country. So I probably can't claim some mystical connection to it in that way. But yes, I was out there, we were filming the documentary. I think we just finished filming a part of it where we were working with an archaeologist. And one of the things, if people who are watching don't know about Timbuktu, it really was once the center of the world. And it was where a lot of gold went through and salt went through, and enslaved people were trafficked there as well. The king, it belonged to a couple of different empires, but at one point it was ruled by an emperor called Mansa Musa, who was the richest person in the world. And when he traveled to do the Hajj, he took so much gold with him that he broke the banks in Europe. So this was, and there were four universities in Timbuktu and many, many, many libraries, which the reason the documentary is called The Lost Libraries of Timbuktu, the libraries were actually hidden when the French invaded in the 1890s. The people of Mali hid their manuscripts, they hid their books and their documents, they walled them up behind plaster, they put them down wells, they put them in trunks in the desert, because the French had, showed pretty rapidly their enthusiasm for pillaging, for plundering and pillaging the goods of conquered colonial nations. So these manuscripts were hidden, and really, although of course the people of Timbuktu knew about them, the families knew about them, the wider world didn't know about them till maybe the 1990s. And they were being gradually brought out and put into museums.
What's really, what strikes me about this is thinking that I think you visited a world that no longer exists in many ways, in having gone to Mali and Timbuktu at that time, because I'm thinking of now the destruction of those libraries and those and the way that local people were doing everything that they could to salvage those books.
Well, in fact, the libraries were never destroyed. There was a lot of misreporting.
Tell me.
I was actually at the Jaipur Literature Festival when the reports started to come through, and there was an Africa correspondent there, and I said, "How do you know the libraries have been destroyed?" I'll tell you this, Maaza, the reason I knew the libraries weren't destroyed is these people know how to hide their stuff, right? These are people who know how to hide their stuff. And sure enough, what they did was they smuggled the manuscripts out over weeks on camel trains and, you know, in the back of four-wheel drives, whatever, but they smuggled them out. They sent them to the museum in Mali. And, but they, in order that their ruse was not uncovered, they had to do two things. One is they had to persuade the Western media that they were stupid. Well, that didn't turn out to be hard, right? So every time a journalist said, you know, what about the manuscript? The good people of Timbuktu would go, oh, it'll be fine. Oh, it'll be fine, you know. So they knew they couldn't tell any Western media because their cover would be blown. And the second thing that they did was that they knew that they were going to have to sacrifice some manuscripts. So they left out the least important ones, you know, the ones that were very ravaged by time or insects or were just duplicates of something. You know, they left a few out. But they didn't, they actually saved 99.999% of them. It was an amazing story. But it is a world that's changed, because when I was in Timbuktu, you know, a lot of people, tourism was a big thing. There was it was starting to be a big thing. There was the Festival du Sable, which is the wonderful music festival that takes place out there. We had all our meals at a beautiful little boutique hotel that had been set up by a French woman who was married to a Malian and her daughter. And they had gone, I presume he was from Timbuktu or had been, and, you know, they'd set up this beautiful little hotel. It was the only really nice place to stay, but, you know, things were coming. I often thought about the people that I met in Timbuktu as things were, as the city was overrun. I mean, they do know that they are at the nexus, you know, they know that they're at the nexus of a cultural, what would you call it, sort of schism. And whenever I spoke, and I interviewed several imams when I was there, and they were extremely proud of their tolerant Islam. They had an Islam that came from the past, that, you know, was tolerant, was liberal, was intellectual. You know, I think that most of them have survived, but they would have had a very frightening time of it. And you can't go there now. I've offered many times to go back and do, you know, return to the lost libraries or something, but it just remains too dangerous. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's I'll let listeners know that in the Lit Hub article, there's a link to that in chat. You can also find a link to this documentary with Aminatta, and it's absolutely beautiful. Hearing you speak about Timbuktu calls to mind a couple of things. One is the access that travel has given you, the access, the openness to other cultures, other ways of living. It's a decentering of the West. I mean, in Timbuktu, it is for the people in Mali or West Africans or Africans, it is the center. It is one of these premier centers of learning, of ancient learning. And I think this is something about your book that is absolutely wonderful, is that constant decentering of a Western perspective. The book gives us an insider's view of whatever that, you know, whether it is travel across Africa or into Scotland and into Europe or into Iran. This is an insider's perspective in one way or another. We're getting an intimate glimpse of something. I wonder, before I jump into my next question, if you could read us something from this book, and then I have a few more questions for you.
I'll read you, well, I can't resist now that you've talked about decentering the West, but the shortest essay in the book, which was something, you know, an encounter that just stayed with me for, you know, the decade after I left, because it was so telling, so perfect. The essay is called In Timbuktu. In Timbuktu, I stopped a man to ask him the way to the post office. The man had a question of his own that he wanted answered first. Is it true, he said, that in Britain people have a thing about Timbuktu? Yes, I said. People think it's far away, like the farthest place on earth. At this, the man laughed for a long time, and then he gave me directions to the post office. And now I'll read a little bit from the first essay. I might read something a little bit. Let me have a look. No, I'm tempted to read you a bit about looping the loop, but I think I should probably read you something more representative.
No, go ahead. Read what you would like.
I don't loop the loop every day. Here we are. This is the window seat and why I love it so much. On an overcast day, the plane breaks through the cloud and into sunlight. As the plane climbs, below you, clouds shift on separate strata, drifting continents composed of shadows and light. Sunlight reflects from their dazzling peaks. Improbable mountains rise. One the shape perhaps of an anvil or an oak. The occasional sight of another plane reveals the scale of the cloudscape. In it, a jumbo jet is reduced to the size of a child's toy as it seems to skate sideways across the sky. Its contrail, a disappearing scar. There are times when the plane flies between two strata of cloud. Sometimes a hole in the clouds above lets the sunlight through. The rays, edged in darkness, seem to radiate outwards from behind the clouds and illuminate spectacularly, not the earth, but the clouds below. We call this God light. To overfly the Sahara by day at 30,000 feet is to feel how it might be to circumnavigate the sun. Nothing save raw light in colors from deep orange to pale yellow, very occasionally fractured by imprecise dark and jagged streaks, which one supposes to be riverbeds or rock formations. Otherwise, there is but the brightness of the sand reflecting the sun's rays, and depending on the exact altitude and tilt of the aircraft, the line where the orange glow of the ground beneath diffuses into the white band of the horizon, which in turn diffuses into blue sky. To overfly the Sahara by night must be what space travel feels like. Gone are the indicators of life, the lights of civilization one sees flying out over what one supposes to be the most barren of lands. Even there, in some crease in the earth, inevitably a winking light or a lone road, leading from where to where it is impossible to know. The Sahara at night is blackness, unmarred by a single star. You cannot tell where the land and sky meet. Only there is this, beyond the reach of the wingtip, a keen-edged moon. The last time I took a daytime flight over the Sahara was a few years ago on a return trip from Johannesburg. The moment we took off, the cabin staff toured the cabin and lowered the blinds. People found their headsets and turned on the screens in front of them. Light flared around the edges of the blinds, and once, when I dared to raise mine over the Sahara, the light leapt in like a living creature. When I fly, I think of what a caveman would think if he saw this, or even knew that one day somebody would. I think of the generations in the not-so-distant past who never saw such a view. I think of those in the future who will never see that wonder which our generation's wantonness with the world's natural resources has made possible. The day will come when we will be nostalgic about flying, as incredible as that once seemed. The experience of having our travel curtailed by the pandemic of 2020 brought that feeling closer to many of us. One day this may be gone, sooner than we allowed ourselves to imagine. Only in flight does one become aware of how much of the world has resisted humankind. The snow-filled corrugations of the mountain ranges of Central Europe, where it's impossible to know where one country ends and another begins. At such times, even the flight map, which traces the path of the plane on the screen in front of you, is as effective as pin the tail on the donkey. A ruffle of mountain falls, a new one rises. Once I imagined we must be flying over the Alps, though I think now it was the Massif Central, because a short time later, I looked down and saw the real Alps. I was entirely unprepared for their scale. They seemed to stretch upwards, reaching not so much for the sky, but as if to swat the plane out of it. I've skied on the Alps, and I remember being awed by their beauty, but I could see only what filled the frame of my vision, which I realized once I was flying over all 1,200 kilometers of them, lying across 8 countries, wasn't very much at all. I'll just read you this tiny bit, I think, because it's probably if you have flown across borders very much at all, you will have flown over a war. I know I have. Consider the matter. People are killing and being killed and living in terror of being killed, while at that point precisely overhead, you were doing what? You were watching the drinks trolley edge down the aisle, handling the frustrations of plastic cutlery and those fiddly salt and pepper packets, selecting the next movie, whether it should be a thriller, a drama, a love, or a war story. It's likely commercial flights to the country have already stopped and the airport is closed or under the control of one faction or another. The borders will be tightly controlled too. Imagine a person looking up and seeing an aeroplane in the sky. The freedom the passing plane must surely represent. It must be like standing on a desert island, watching the ships pass by without the possibility even of being able to lift a hand and wave or to shout and be heard.
Thank you so much, Aminatta. Those beautiful observations that you've just read for us come from a lifetime of travel. I wonder if you could share with us some of the memories, the childhood memories you have specifically of being on planes. What vision did it give you of the world and your place in it?
Well, I mean, flying to me at the very start, it meant, well, first of all, the first times I flew, I can't remember actually. I took a ship my very first time. I was 6 months old and we left Scotland to go to Sierra Leone when my father graduated from medical school. But, the first few flights I took were actually more about getting out of danger, because Sierra Leone was already heading towards political strife. And so sometimes, on occasion, my mother would take us and we would leave the country. My father spent a lot of time as a political prisoner. So, first of all, we're sort of flying and fleeing were more or less the same thing. And then, my father, like another of his generation, had the idea that the best thing that could possibly happen to his children was that they should be educated at British boarding schools. And so this was what he ploughed all of his finances into. It sounds like a privilege to go to boarding school, and it was, but at the same time, I would we didn't own a house. We didn't take foreign holidays. There was an obsession, absolute obsession in that generation about giving your children the best possible education. And that education was to be found overseas. And that has a long history. And it's not a big surprise. I mean, there's an education to be had in Sierra Leone. At that time, there was something of an education to be had in Sierra Leone, less and less so now as the years went by. But my father came from a generation who'd been sent overseas for a specific reason, and that was to learn how the world worked, and that was to learn how other people thought and other nations organized themselves. So, when I look back, he wasn't sending me abroad so that, my maths would be perfected. He was sending me abroad so that I would learn about the world. I would understand how the world worked. But I can tell you, Maaza, I did not appreciate it. I used to cry at the airport. And then I would weep at the airport, but then I'd get on the plane and it would all be like, oh, because I was an unaccompanied minor. Were you ever an unaccompanied minor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, it means something very different now.
Yeah.
I was an unaccompanied minor. We had these little books, a little junior jet book, and the captain would sign it. They would give you log your miles. I mean, it was basically frequent flyer miles.
Yeah.
They would log your miles. But the thing that I remember most about the whole experience of being an unaccompanied minor, there were two things. One was, the plane is this perfect space where everybody had to be nice to you. Right? I mean, they had to keep you quiet for 8 hours. So, and also, these were the days of very strict gender roles. So the hostesses were all women. They were all beautiful, or at least they were made to look beautiful. They gave you toys. They gave you your food first. They had to, right?
Right.
They had, you got a box of toys, and then at some point you were taken forward to the captain. So
I remember that.
My real understanding of flying was that, I'd been visiting the cockpit all my life. So that was very, it was all very exciting. I remember once, that we had adventures. We got lost and missed planes multiple times. And sometimes we would be between one airline and another. So we would just have to take care of ourselves. And there's a passage in the book about being in Charles de Gaulle Airport, which is like Lord of the Flies.
I hate that airport.
Running around. And then another time I got lost in Los Angeles and some other passengers looked after me, So it gave me a fearlessness of the world, I think, that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I'm simply not afraid of the world. And I am constantly surprised by people who, and worried for people who are afraid of the world.
You mentioned your father, and you write about him in this really striking essay. I think it's Obama in the Renaissance. And I wondered if you could talk about the connection you see between these two men, or perhaps what they represented.
Well, Obama's biography, apart from the fact that I didn't become president of the United States, Obama's biography and mine are very similar. Our parents were within a year of each other the same age. Both men came from African countries, different sides of the continent. Both women were white women for different countries, but they met for exactly the same reason, right? They met for exactly the same reason. They met because there was, 150 years leading up to this point, so whenever the sort of scramble from Africa began, and even before that, slavery and all of that, one could take it back even further, but, there was a momentum that made that happen, right? And it was absolutely the result of policy and determination, right? It was very, very deliberate. So when I used to read, when Obama was first elected, I thought, oh, good. I'll stop having to explain to people the circumstances of my birth, and there'll be Obama, and I can say what's like Obama. But then what happened is Obama got turned into this rarity, this oddity, this most extraordinary thing. And there's a line in a biography that's written about him, which says, no life could be put together, could have been created or something out of such randomness. And it wasn't random at all. That there were meetings at the highest level that made this happen. And what it was that at the end of empire, when Britain had to get out, Britain's hand was forced by America, but also by the war, the fact that Britain had no more money and whatever, but America wanted access to those markets. As part of the whole deal was that Britain give up the empire. Britain had to sort of figure out, and France and the other departing colonials had to figure out, we sort of deliberately undereducated these people and refused them access to any kind of power-making decision. And now someone's got to run the country. So the British and then the incoming Sierra Leonean administrations began to send hundreds and thousands of young people overseas in order to train them to be accountants, doctors, lawyers, you know, bureaucrats, all the things we were going to need, administrators, but nurses, everything. Now, Kenya's position was kind of interesting. There'd been a long history of West Africans going to Britain, and often of their own volition. And Britain actually London became the, unintentionally, it became the center of the end of empire, because all these people from wherever, from African American, the African Americans, but also the Jamaicans, the Sri Lankans, the Ceylonese as they would have been then, the Indians, the Pakistanis, you know, they were all getting there and saying, oh my God, we're all in the same position with these people. We're all, and I remember Ngugi Younger saying to me, it was the first time he realized the connection between all these Commonwealth countries, or who would become Commonwealth countries. So now Kenya is a different case, because Kenya, the Mau Mau have fought the British, and they have basically forced the hand of the British in a way that no other African, apart from the Ethiopians in Italy, but no other African country has managed to do. And Britain is angry and humiliated, and it refuses to give the Kenyans scholarships. It refuses. So what do the Kenyans do? Tom Mboya, a Kenyan nationalist leader, goes to America, teams up with a whole load of African-American activists, and starts a lecture tour. And he ends up talking to John F. Kennedy. And out of all of that, out of the Mboya and Kennedy and all the other people who were part of it, like Harry Belafonte and others, all these people who were part of it, come the Kenyan airlifts, and they bring Kenyans to America. Because, I mean, Kennedy can see it, right? He can get a foothold in Africa. Yeah. So they start bringing Kenyans to America, and Obama's father was one of them, and he went to Hawaii. So there was nothing random about it at all.
It's fascinating to think about the way that personal history intersects so closely with political history. Political movements actually dictate personal movements.
Always.
Always, right?
Always.
Absolutely.
So everything, actually. Who's ever sort of left home just because it crossed their minds? Even if you think about it, in Britain, which has this great history of travel, and it's very much part of the British culture that at a certain age you go overseas and you learn about the world, right? It's very much part of that. But that all started with the third son, or was it the fourth son? But, in an aristocratic family, the first son inherits.
Yes.
Second son, church, is it? Third son, army. Fourth son has to go out and seek his fortune and become an explorer, and that's what they did. So even that is dictated by society and the politics of that society, and then Britain becomes this, or England becomes this nation that essentially takes over half the world.
Well, and it also, speaking of those kinds of movements, your book addresses in really profound ways questions of how freely people can move through the world. I think you and I have spoken about, as children, both of us had backgrounds where I was always in an airport. I seemed to be always on a plane, going somewhere, traveling somewhere. And yet that freedom of movement is something that not many people have, or not, it's a privilege. And your book addresses migration and the way that movement can be constricted for some people. But there's also this other, another essay, Crossroads, where you talk about what it's like to move through the world as a woman. And I wondered if you can talk about these different kinds of movements.
No, I think you mean power walking.
Yeah, power walking. Yeah. Sorry, power walking.
Power walking is moving through the world. And you know, well, any woman, I mean, all the women in the audience know what I'm talking about without me having to explain it. You know, you have to take care of your personal safety, and you will have to deal with street harassment at some level, you know, really almost wherever you are. I've been to very few places in the world where there was none. No actual hassle, but actually, no, come on, I'm sorry, I'm going to completely take that back. I've never been anywhere in the world where I haven't had to think about it all. But I have been in places in the world where it doesn't happen. I have been in places in the world where it doesn't happen. But I've never been anywhere in the world, you know, simply by the fact that I inhabit the female form, where I haven't had to think about my personal safety. But that kind of catcalling is very culturally specific. Yeah. And it's specific to certain places. And, you know, in the essay, what I do is I sort of unpack what catcalling is about, and that essentially it's a form of social control. You know, you can, I mean, the essay actually begins with me walking down the King's Road in Chelsea in London, and 3 men walk up to me, and the first one tells me I'm pretty, and the second one says nothing, and the third one calls me the N-word. And, you know, and then they sort of, you know, they go off together. There's no, and so, you know, if anything told me that it was a form of harassment, as opposed to, as we were constantly being told when we were young, a compliment, but actually it's a form of social control, the same way that, you know, in apartheid countries, Black people are controlled, you know, by being humiliated on the street. You know, by not being allowed to do this, by being made to sit at the back of the bus, by not being allowed to, by having to get off the pavement or tip their cap, or, you know, and if they don't do that, then in this country in particular, they could be lynched. Yeah. So, you know, that it's a form of social control. If you don't smile, love, give us a smile, love. I mean, that is, you know, that's actually a threat, right? Yeah. You know, the minute you decline to give a smile, you know it's going to turn nasty. And it's all about putting layers of control and layers of control and layers of control. And it's a very deft game. You know, it's a very deft game. And it's, you know, to me, utterly disingenuous when people, and men in particular, claim not to know what it's about. I mean, I accept that not all men do it, but I don't think it takes a huge amount of thought to figure out that you know, that every woman in the world is complaining to you about something, you know, that is happening, and yet you deny it. Yeah. You know, and you know, and yet you know, you do nothing about it.
You write, you know, the reason I was thinking of Crossroads too, and it goes off of what you've just said. You write about your experiences as a mixed race woman coming into the United States in 2015. What did America teach you about moving through the streets as a mixed race woman, but also you're perceived maybe less, not necessarily as mixed race, but Black? There's a different.
Well, America, you know, the thing about America and race, which is kind of exhausting, is that the size of America and the scale of the crime make it, you know, give it a very, very dominant voice, and, you know, popular culture and all of that. So, you know, when I first came to America, actually, I remember I had an African-American boyfriend in London. And I was talking about something that had happened and that somebody had referred to me as being, you know, mixed race. And my African-American boyfriend said, "How did they know?" And I said, "Well, he could see me." And he kept saying, how did he know? I thought, "We could see me." So, you know, so there was already this clearly going to be this kind of confusion. And when I came to America, and one of the things I write about is how, and people got angry with me, and, you know, maybe people in the audience will get angry too, but you have to understand that there are different perspectives on race, and different people, you know, in different places, you may find a different group in command and control of it. So here, frankly, white people are in charge of it. And they decided that if you had a drop of black blood, you were considered to be a black person. Now, this is not true elsewhere in the world. Elsewhere in the world, if you look white, you are considered to be white, right? And in most of Africa, and in Timbuktu and in Mali, if you are paler than other people, you are called white. That's what they'll call you as a shorthand. They may sort of see some general difference, but they're not going to acknowledge that, you know, you have African blood. They're going to look at the way you dress, they're going to look at the color of your skin, and they're going to call you white. So there was this funny moment, you know, back to Timbuktu, which we've talked about an awful lot, and there are other things in the book, but I was in Timbuktu with my crew who were all white, apart from the Malian fixer, and Obama had just been elected, and we were talking about it. And I explained to the white crew, what the producer, that in this country, that Obama would be considered white. And the producer went, no, don't be ridiculous, he isn't. And I said, and so the fixer said, you are in Africa now. Right. And so he called a waiter and he said to the waiter, Obama, black or white? And the waiter said, white. And that's, you know, it is that reversing of the gaze, but it's also about who is dictating this stuff. And I understand that being African-American here is cultural, historical, you know, there are all kinds of things in it which there aren't necessarily when you find a community which hasn't been so segregated elsewhere. But it is baffling for the outsider to come and see people who look to the eye white and yet are being called African American. And you know what, I had my cultural interpreters, and they all said to me, don't say anything, don't. You know, they said I thought so too, but don't say anything. And the one time I did say something, I managed to upset somebody. So, and I hope I haven't tonight, but you know, it is to the outsider something that we have to learn to understand. And what slightly concerns me is as it gets exported, it sort of, you know, it deepens this idea that America's view of race is the only view of race. You know, that's the bit that kind of worries me. And you know, I mean, this is a joke, but this is a laugh. But I remember watching a program, Ugly Betty, and a white African friend of mine, a Kenyan white African, rang me up and said, so we've been watching this series for about 2 years. And he said, do you know that that woman is supposed to be white? It was black. It was the boss. It was Vanessa Williams. Is that her name?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he rang me up and said, do you know she's supposed to be black? And I said, no, I didn't get it at all. Until one day I caught her name in the credits and I remembered who Vanessa Williams was. But I didn't get it at all. So the thing is that the whole world was watching this program differently, right? Britain was watching it differently. Africa was certainly watching it differently. You know, I don't think any of those nations really, you know, even the colonial nations would have viewed her as a black woman.
Wow.
So it's, you know, there's going to be a lot to think about in the future. There's going to be a lot to think about.
I think, yeah. Thank you. That's fascinating. There's so much to think about, especially as
when you came here.
Absolutely. I mean, it was completely. I had to learn what I was here in this country. It was something completely different.
The best way to learn it actually is to go to South Africa. There's a bit in the book I learned, but I go to South Africa and then I learn, you know, I'm reminded of the systems of classification, and I realized that this was an apartheid state, right? And you know, when people talk about segregation, and no, it was an apartheid state with, you know, ways of determining your recording. So I think Isabel Wilkerson with her book Caste is
that's it.
Put a finger on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a couple of questions. I have more questions, but I think we need to get to the audience questions. Ashley, would you like to do this? I have actually, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I'll do them. Let's see, let's start with this one. Aminatta, you mentioned misreporting by Western journalists with regard to the libraries of Timbuktu and misperceptions by Western audiences. Can you explain a few of the more egregious or damaging misperceptions that your travels have revealed that you might hope Westerners unlearn?
Well, I mean, we've covered a few of them. Who's at the center? Who determines, you know, who or what somebody is? You know, all of these things. I mean, I think that it is completely fine and understandable to come from the culture you come from and see things from the perspective that you do. But not to be able to understand that there are other perspectives is one of the most curious things, I think. Myopia bewilders me. It just bewilders me. I'm thinking two things. I'm thinking that people are sort of essentially the same. There's no huge difference in the human being from one place to the next, but there's nothing. But people grow up with, in certain conditions, be they geographical, political, or cultural, that will shape the way in which they think, or just on who's the dominant group in a country. So, or, you know, not being able to see it in your own country. So when you can't see those parallels, so there's sort of two dangers, you know. The one is everyone's the same and everyone does everything the same as me, you know, which I, you know, a member of my extended family is once said, but everybody drinks milk. And I said, no, they don't. No, they don't. Nobody in Africa drinks milk. Nobody apart from the nomadic tribes. You know, most of Asia doesn't drink milk. So, I mean, that's not particularly egregious, but, you know, that's sort of that kind of, everything in the world is the same. And then the other danger is exoticizing it. You know, everyone is so different. I couldn't possibly understand them. I couldn't possibly know what they're saying or how they're thinking. So, you know, so you look for the patterns. And when I think of my Scottish family, and actually we've talked about race in Africa a lot, but there is a whole essay on going to the Shetland and Orkney Islands to trace my Scottish family. And then, you know, there's an essay on chronic insomnia around the world. So there are essays about different things. And even the American inauguration, there's a short essay on my effort to visit the Trump inauguration, which was more funny than frightening. It was funny, it wasn't frightening. So you know, the other danger is thinking that everybody's so different you can't possibly, you know, there can be no meeting of minds. And I often think in my family, you know, I think of my family, my Sierra Leone family, my Scottish family, and I think, okay, you know, you say one belongs to a tribe, but the other one is equally very happy to belong to a clan, right? And wear clan colours and go to the clan meet every year. My mother goes to the clan meet every single year. I mean, not this year, but she goes to the clan meet. She's Scottish country dancer. She takes part in all of these extraordinary cultish activities. My Sierra Leone family belonged to the Timney so-called tribe, which is a British word, but, you know, ethnic group. You know, they do much the same thing, the dances, the whatnot. I mean, you know, they do all the same things, have clan gatherings and have dances. And if you look at my grandfathers, you would have the same man, right? The same man, you know, religious, strict, ascetic, you know, slim, authoritarian, patriarchal, both opposed to my parents' wedding for the same reason, right? For the same reason. So they would have got on just fine. So, you know, it's a way of thinking. And I find it, you know, there are a few people I know who seem to do it naturally, who seem always to be able to look prismatically at things, to look at things in the round. There are some people who learn it, and there are some people who never learn it. For whatever reason, they never learn it. I mean, I grew up with it, so it's something I do quite naturally, but it is that. And I suppose I should just nip to what the most egregious for me was the misreporting of the Sierra Leonean War. I mean, that prompted me to write a whole book, because that war was categorized in the ways I've described: tribal, inexplicable, savage. And at the same time, the war in the former Yugoslavia was going on, and it was being reported in every detail: political, military, you know, even the tribal conflict at the heart of it, which, by the way, there wasn't in Sierra Leone. Even the tribal conflict at the heart of it, you know, another name was given to, called ethnic. You know, and actually the Sierra Leone War was never tribal, never tribal. So that in my life has been the most egregious, and it spurred me to write several books, actually, but certainly my first.
Wonderful, thank you. We have two more questions. Catherine asks, she'd love to hear you comment on the tension between ease of movement and deep belonging and or relationship to place and people.
I don't have much of a relationship to place. You know, I taught transnational literature at Georgetown, and I was telling my class about something. And of course, it attracted a lot of transnational folk, either from double, dual backgrounds or triple backgrounds, third culture kids, as we call them, which I was sort of, have been anyway at times. Or people who were just here to study, and they came to the class, and I was describing, you know, somebody returning to a country after being a refugee for a long time, and, you know, just having to go back, even though it was still dangerous, which a lot of people do, choose to stay. And she just said, I can't really imagine having that kind of connection to space, to place, right? It's like, okay, there are places we like and places we know, but is it everything? And place is not everything to me. It really isn't. People are far more important than place, I would say. So there are places I like, and there are people I like, and there are places I wouldn't want to be. There are certain places I don't want to live, and there are places I don't want to retire to. But broadly, I don't have a strong connection to place at all. And I am actually, the book is more of an exploration of how it is that some of us are like that, when so much emphasis is being put on place at the moment, and so much emphasis is being put on roots. And I say, people that have roots, we are not plants, we have feet, right? And feet are made for walking. And human beings were always migratory until 10,000 years ago, when we settled to farm. We were always migratory. And so I think that connection, that the fact that so many narratives, and I put writers at the center of all of this, right? Novelists and poets. So much has been about the land. I think it's about staking a claim to the land. And very often, of course, staking a claim to land that is not yours, right? That is not yours. I mean, it would not be seen as yours, right? Like in this country, for example. So, you know, I'm writing a counter narrative, which is, what is this obsession with place? And what does it mean to some people, and what does it mean to me? And, you know, what does it mean to the members of my family? But on the whole, most members of my family, I'm not the first generation of my family like this. So, you know, and actually it's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years, movement.
Lovely, thank you. I'd like to hear how you view the importance of some form of a unifying connection among the peoples of the African diaspora, given their differing views of Blackness.
That's a really, really tough question. I'll give it to you, Maaza. Since you're actually the president of this country and I'm not.
I am not sure if I can answer that. I don't know, Aminatta. Like, what is, I think the one thing that is always striking to me is when we speak of colonialism across the continent, when we hear the stories of what happened to people, they were in essence enslaved by those colonial powers on their own land, but so much was taken away from them. And I think there is a conversation that could be had about the ways that the generations that came after have had to grapple with that history, whether it's slavery in America or the slavery of the colonial era. I think that might be an interesting conversation to have.
I mean, I think you're right. I think we have to be very aware of the divide and rule that has taken place. So, one of the things that surprised me a lot when I came to America was the amount of anger towards Africans for the role that Africans played in slavery. But you have to look at slavery as in Africa. It wasn't a color thing. It was about conflict and tribes, and ultimately, there was corruption and wealth and all kinds of things. But they were not our brothers and our sisters. They were actually our enemies. But what's really interesting, and there's an essay in the book about slavery and in Sierra Leone, and which explores a lot of that. What I was interviewing a young writer from Ghana who'd written a book about a black African slaver. And at one point I said to her, I said, I've heard more about the African involvement in slavery than I've heard about the white involvement and the European involvement in slavery since I got to America. And the entire audience, which was Ghanaian and West African, went, yeah. And I think there's been a real divide and rule tactic played. And I think the idea that we've all been living in bliss in Africa, you're right, we've been grappling. The Kenyans had to fight a very bloody war. The South Africans have been grappling. The Zimbabweans still grappling. We're all dealing with the after effects of that. So I think we could look more closely at what binds us than what separates us. And I think it's quite deliberate, that game of divide and rule. And I think we should really be aware of that.
Thank you. And thank you, Maaza, for coming in on that one. Going above and beyond. I have one last question from Mason. Related to the myopia you mentioned, in my work in middle schools, I'm increasingly convinced that my main job is to help people, boys especially, but more than them, begin to develop an understanding that just because your voice or concerns aren't centered doesn't mean they or you are excluded. Do you agree? If so, any experiences from your travels and work that you can share that might help with this?
Well, for middle schoolers, I don't know. I mean, are you thinking of people who were previously at the centre, who are now no longer at the centre? Because there's a strong sense that
Mason says yes.
You no longer dictate the conversation, that you are not being heard. Well, I don't, I say it with my students. I haven't really come across it with my students. They're sort of all pretty respectful of each other. But I think it's certainly true that, equality can feel a lot like loss. And, I spend a lot of time trying to think my way into what must it be like to have been at the center of everything and to never have had to consider the view from elsewhere. So, I suppose we do a couple of things. When I think about, because I teach writing, we do a couple of things. I make them write from a different perspective. And I know that this is annoyingly being challenged by the whole kind of, you can't appropriate my experience, but I make them appropriate somebody else's experience. I make them, and I put out pictures of different people, and they have to pick up a picture of a person who does not look like them. And they have to write something, and I give them a story, and I say, you have to write this story from that person's perspective. And then we also have our drama department here. You can find it online. They have something called In My Shoes. And they've been doing it over the pandemic, where they have people write, I think that this is the way it works. One drama student writes lines for another drama student who is a different kind of person. I mean, I think they've concentrated mostly on economic disadvantage, but they write from their own perspective, but then they give it to the other person to perform. And they have been doing that online, and I'm pretty sure it's the Laboratory for Global Performance. I'm pretty sure you'll find that online. But there are these performance-based things that you can do. Otherwise, you know, I don't know what to say except get used to it.
Wonderful.
I have one closing question for Aminatta before we close. Aminatta, I'm curious about what projects you're working on now. I mean, we're slowly starting to come out of lockdown, but did you start something during lockdown, or are you looking forward to starting something now?
Did I start something during lockdown? I have a 10-year-old child who hasn't been at school for a year. So, no. I did not. Other than life as a middle school teacher, I did not. Everything. I found it so distracting. And this question of, are you getting lots of writing done? I was like, are you kidding? Are you kidding? Yeah. My house is full of people, you know, there's bickering all day long about their schoolwork. So, and you know, no. And also, I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on now.
Which means she is, everyone. Which means she is.
I am working on something else. But I'm pretty suspicious to tell you.
Don't say it.
I can only
say it.
That the immense pleasure that these essays have given me, and my, you know, I used to use essays as a palate cleanser between how this collection came together. I'd write a bit of non-fiction, then I'd go back to it, and I write a bit of non-fiction. But of course, my first book was a full-length work of non-fiction. So I am going back to a full-length work of non-fiction.
Right.
And it is set on the African continent. And that's the only thing I'm going to tell you.
So we heard it here first. And that's all. Thank you so much, Aminatta. It was such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you both. We get some thank yous in the chat. This has been lovely and rich. I could listen to the two of you for hours. Thank you for your time tonight. Everyone, we have the book. This is my galley, but we have lovely hard copies.
Absolutely beautiful.
Beautiful piece of work. Thank you. Wonderful. Have a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you, my dear. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.